Hello my dear viewers, this week I put together a very short video. As for me as a professor, it's the end of the semester, and so my full attention is dedicated to putting together final exams, grading the last assignments, and end of the semester meetings. Lots and lots of meetings. So I thought to myself, you know what kind of a video can I quickly put together about New York and yet at the same time get at least a little bit of a sleep this week and keep my sanity? So I had few ideas, but I went along with Carl Schurz Park in Upper East Side, Manhattan. As not only is it a beautiful park, but also it is the location of the Gracie Mansion. However, before we take a look at the park itself, there are a few interesting buildings in the area and lots of history behind them, like for example, what are the Cherokee Apartments on 77th and 78th Streets. They used to be known as the East River Houses or the Shively Sanitary Tenements. They were named after Dr. Henry Shively, who was the head of tuberculosis clinic in New York Presbyterian Hospital, and whose vision these buildings really were. Tuberculosis, or simply TB, is a bacterial infection that can affect a person in many different ways, but usually it attacks the lungs. And in the period of 1900 to 1910, it was really the leading cause of death in the United States, right behind pneumonia. Dr. Shively believed that the people who were most exposed to TB were the poor, as they lived in overcrowded apartments with poor ventilation and inadequate sanitation. Hence, to prevent TB from spreading, it was vital to provide proper living conditions and make sure that people practice good hygiene. And that was the idea behind these buildings you see, to provide housing to those who had tuberculosis and their families. This land was bought, and the project really was sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. William and Anne Vanderbilts. It opened in January of 1912 by offering about 383 apartments, which were between 2 and 5 rooms. The rent was kept low, and they had heating, hot water, stoves with proper ventilation, and everything about them was really meant to create a clean, ventilated environment for tuberculosis patients and their families, sort of like a home hospital. As you see, each apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows and balconies to provide lots of sunlight and to maximize fresh air. In the summer, let's say the balconies could be open and technically a mattress could be placed on it to sleep at night. Now, I know it might sound weird for some of us today. However, we have to remember that in 1912, I think air conditioning was already invented by then. However, regular homes like these would simply not have them yet. Hence, in the summer, it was fairly common to find people in New York City sleeping on their balconies or even fire escapes on very hot summer nights. Here on Google Maps, you see that each of the buildings also has a central court. Again, everything to maximize the sunlight and fresh air in the apartments. And I have to admit, the tiled roof, limestone, everything looks pretty good even for modern standards. The hospital sold the buildings, however, in 1924, and today they are private residents. But you see, even in something like this, we can stand and not just admire the buildings, but also examine lots of history, from the living conditions of New Yorkers 100 years ago, to, let's say, contagious diseases, to changes in architecture. And I'm sure that there are some experts that can make a fascinating hour-long documentary. Unfortunately, my knowledge is somewhat limited, but still, I felt it was worth showing you something like this. Okay, so let us now go a few streets up to the Carl Schurz Park. Originally called East River Park, in 1910 it was renamed Carl Schurz Park. So at the same time that the East River houses were being built that I just showed you. Carl Schurz came to the United States from Germany, and wow, he was many things. He was a general fighting for the Union during the American Civil War. He then became the first German American to serve in Senate. Secretary of Interior, newspaper editor. I mean, his career was very rich. But at the same time, I feel like we cannot forget about his wife, Margarethe Schurz. She opened the first kindergarten in the United States, bringing the concept over from Germany. So in my video about the Wyckoff House, which I think was 3 weeks ago, I mentioned that during World War I, many German names and words were being changed as America was at war with Germany. But not all of them, and the word kindergarten is a good example of that. Kinder, meaning children, Garten, garden in German. In the park itself, we have beautiful views of the East River. On the other side, Astoria, Queens. And in between, we have Roosevelt Island. So now we are in December. However, in the summer, it is really nice and peaceful in this park, even though right below us, we have the FDR Drive, a major parkway here in Manhattan. And here is a glimpse of that parkway below us. Okay, so aside from a typical park and great views, there are two other interesting things here. First, if we go under this arch, here we have a cool statue of the fictional character Peter Pan, a boy that can fly and never grows up. Now, I have to admit, I never read the novels, but I did watch the 1991 movie called Hook, where Peter Pan is played by Robin Williams, one of my favorite actors. This statue was made in the 1920s and originally stood in a theater on 42nd Street. However, after the theater was torn down in the 1960s, I believe, the statue was moved here. Interesting story is that in 1998, supposedly a group of teenagers picked up the statue and threw it into the East River. However, it was found the next day with minimal damage and reinstalled. Of course, this time it was bolted down more securely. And the statue stands right next to the Gracie Mansion, which is the official residence of the New York City mayors. Right here is probably as close as you can get to it, but it is a beautiful building which is like New York City's White House. It was originally built in 1799 by Archibald Gracie, who was a Scottish-born merchant and businessman, and it's after whom the building gets its name. After being privately occupied for a few years, it eventually is transferred to the city of New York in 1896 and then gets incorporated into the Carl Schurz Park, extending the park itself. It opened in 1927, housing the Museum of the City of New York. However, in 1942, so during the Second World War, it was transformed into the mayor's residence, with the first mayor to use it being Fiorello LaGuardia. In the 1960s, the house was further extended with an addition of a new wing. And I have to tell you, from first-hand experience, the house is gorgeous on the inside as well. A few days ago, I was lucky enough to be a guest at an event inside of the house, and it was a very nice special experience. Again, I did not record too much inside as there were other guests, and generally, I try to respect everyone's privacy as much as I can. And second, to be completely honest with you, I was busy stuffing myself with these small little donuts that were coming around on trays. Then I discovered there were other sweets as well, and at that point, let's just say I pretty much dedicated most of my time tracking down the food. However, I know tours are available, so maybe in the future there is a possibility that I can show you more on the inside and provide a bit more detailed history behind everything. But for now, there are like 1,000 cameras on the outside perimeter, on the fence. And since I was walking around in a circle trying to get a good angle of the house, I was probably the most watched person in New York City in that moment. So hopefully in the future, I can get proper permissions and avoid the 100 cameras following me. But right behind the Gracie Mansion, there is the 90th Street Ferry, which you can take to explore some other New York City locations. Or if you want to continue walking, right next to the ferry, there is the Department of Sanitation Marine Transfer Station. So maybe those of you who live in Manhattan and you want to know where the trash goes, well, most likely here to this transfer station, which opened actually quite recently. So garbage trucks unload their trash here, which is then placed in secure containers, and then they are placed on barges and transferred to trains, which then move the trash to either landfills or, more likely than not, incinerators to burn it. The removal of trash is a fascinating process, from trucks to ships to trains, all happening with many people not even realizing it or giving it a second thought. And quite honestly, it's something I would love to explore a little bit more on this channel in the future, as I myself would like to learn a few more things about this process. And on the other side, across the FDR Drive, there is the Asphalt Green, which today is a non-profit organization which promotes a healthy lifestyle. So there's a pool, a soccer field, gym, and so on. But as you see, these buildings were originally an asphalt plant from 1944 until 1968, where asphalt was produced for paving New York City roads. In fact, really since like 1914, since World War I, there was an asphalt facility here next to the East River. So barges would deliver things like sand and stone and eventually turning it in this location into asphalt. But it is an interesting building in terms of like architecture. So, you know what, no matter where you walk or turn and look, there's always some interesting story behind this city and its structures. I hope you enjoyed this short video, and I will try to wrap up my semester in the next few days and then focus a little bit more on showing you some fantastic locations here in New York. But until then, I hope all of you are well, and I will see you soon. Bye.